Welcome back, Year 10. So today's lesson is going to be continuing to look at different ecosystems, small-scale ecosystems today. But before we start on some new knowledge, I would like you to recap what we did together last lesson, which was looking at what an ecosystem is, what a food chain and what a food web is. So there's a 4-mark question here that I would like you to have a go at answering. You are going to be submitting this to me through Show My Homework or email if you can't do it through Show My Homework. But as it's a 4-mark question, you should be spending about 5 minutes on this. So the question is, describe a food chain for a pond ecosystem in the UK. So we basically did this last lesson. If you've got your information and your notes from last lesson in front of you, that's going to make your life a lot easier. Remember, a 4-mark question should be roughly 2 developed sentences. And when we're using the term describe, we are just saying what something is like. We're not saying why it's like that. Remember, for a good answer, you're going to need to include your specifics. So I want you to have a go at this question, pause the video. If you are struggling, a couple of hints will appear in a few moments. So have a go at brainstorming what you can remember. If you're struggling, take a look at the hints that are going to appear shortly. Right, so as I say, please make sure that you submit that to your teacher through Show My Homework. The option will be on the original homework post. It can be handwritten, typed, we really don't mind. But for today's lesson, we're going to be looking at how ecosystems can change and how what could be a small change might have quite a big impact for an ecosystem as a whole. So we're going to be looking at the natural and human factors which change ecosystems, and we're going to be looking at an example of a small-scale ecosystem. As with last lesson, the activities that we do are to be found in this booklet. If you haven't got it, don't forget that it's attached to the homework just where you found the link for this video. And if you're having problems being able to access it or look at it, please make sure you email your teacher. So, changes to ecosystems. Remember that the term ecosystem is just what we use to describe a collection of living and non-living things which create a particular environment. So when we talk about an ecosystem, it could be anything from something as small as a pond all the way through to an entire tropical rainforest like the Amazon. But ecosystems have developed over hundreds of thousands of years, and they have adapted over time. They've changed to things like temperature change that we looked at in our last topic, different types of climate, and the change that they're experiencing at the moment because of humans is kind of unprecedented. It's happening faster than change has ever happened before, and so ecosystems are having to adapt to that change to be able to survive. So what I would like you to have a think about are what are some of the human and natural changes that might cause ecosystems to have to adapt, to have to change. They could be positive changes, they could be negative changes. So I want you to pause this video, have a brainstorm, try and split them into human changes, things that people have done, and natural changes, so things that would happen if there were no humans on the planet. And once you've had a think of some, there's a little stretch task here where I'd like you to try and colour code your answers according to whether they would affect the whole globe or just a small ecosystem, a local scale ecosystem. That's quite a difficult thing to do, so you might need to pause and have a think about that for a little while. So pause this video, have a brainstorm, come up with a list, and we'll look at some answers together in a minute. Okay, so human changes then. This is just a few of the examples. There are hundreds or thousands that we could probably come up with if we had time, but here are just a few. So things like air pollution causing the extinction of some animals who can't cope with the pollution that's in the air now. Chemical spillages into water sources, so pollution from factories or from hotels, getting into places like the Great Barrier Reef. Deforestation is one you're probably really familiar with seeing in the news. Removal of trees destroys habitats for plants, but also animals like orangutans. Temperature change, a really topical thing for the topic that we've just finished, because of the enhanced greenhouse effect. Remember, the greenhouse effect itself is normal, but the enhanced one, where we are contributing to it with our greenhouse gases, is a human change. Rising sea levels as a result of that, and the melting ice caps, water finding its way into the sea, rising the sea levels and submerging entire countries and the ecosystems that go with those countries. Physical changes, then we have natural temperature change because of things like volcanic eruptions and those Milankovitch cycles, which is where the orbit of the Earth around the sun changes shape. Natural hazards like earthquakes. After the 2011 earthquake that happened in Japan, there was an eruption of sorts at a nuclear power plant called the Fukushima plant, and that led to leakage of radioactive waste into the nearby ecosystems, which probably will never recover. Natural pest outbreaks, which kill off species, like there's a disease called Dutch elm disease, which kills off elm trees, and that's found its way across most of Europe over the last 50 or so years. Just a reminder, now that you have these examples, please do add them to your lists, and I would like you to again try and code them according to whether you think they could affect just a small local scale ecosystem or whether they're likely to affect the whole world all at once. So pause this video, add these to your lists, and have a go at the challenge task, please. So, talking about small scale ecosystems, which is what we're focusing on today, there's a nice little diagram here just taken from the textbook, which shows a few common things that are happening across the UK to our smaller scale ecosystems. We're talking woodlands, farms, ponds, marine ecosystems, so sea ecosystems. So we can see here that we've got woods being cut down, deforestation happening, really common across the UK for things like building roads, the new HS2 high-speed rail link that's going to go across the UK is going to result in a lot of trees and habitat being cleared, and that destroys habitats for birds and affects the nutrient cycle. Remember the way that we move energy, nutrients, goodness around an ecosystem, from plants taking it up through the soil, those plants then being consumed by herbivores and other animals then consuming those, and when the animals and plants eventually die and decay or decompose, those nutrients go back into the soil and the whole cycle starts again. We've also had a lot of hedgerow removal, so the bushes and hedges between farmers' fields that used to be there, say 50 years ago, have been taken away to allow for the fact that we now have ginormous machinery that needs to be able to get from field to field. And so that has destroyed a lot of habitat for things like nesting birds, but also larger animals like hedgehogs, badgers, etc. We have got something called eutrophication, which, as we have a lot of in geography, is a fancy name for something that's not that fancy. This means that where you have water sources like ponds or rivers near farms, where the farmers have put fertilisers and pesticides on their fields, those chemicals wash off into the local water sources and can affect them through things like overgrowing of algae, you know, that kind of green pond scummy type stuff on the top, which can kill a lot of other plants and animals. So these are just some of the examples of generic changes to ecosystems in the UK. What we need to look at is a specific ecosystem. So we are going to be looking at Western Woods. I couldn't think of a better small-scale ecosystem to be using, because I would bet that the majority of you have been here at some point or could go here if you wanted to. It is located just to the south of Baldock, and it is an enclosed woodland, so it's kind of fenced off from everything else, quite nice and protected. It's not an especially big place, but I would imagine at the moment it's very popular with people going out for walks there. It is public land, so you can freely go and visit it whenever you want to, and it might be a nice idea for you to go and visit it if you are close to Western Woods, making sure you're staying socially distanced and everything. But it's also a really nice example of a small scale ecosystem because it is managed to make sure that it can be used by everybody, but to also make sure that it provides the best habitat that it possibly can. So your task is you are going to be researching some information about Western Woods to fill in the boxes in the booklet that you've got. So it's page 25, I believe. And you are, I don't know why it says page 11 there, it's page 25 in your booklet. So make sure that you take a look at the next slide to give you a bit of guidance, because the titles in the top of the boxes are not especially helpful for some of them, so you might need a little bit more explanation. You should spend at least 20 to 25 minutes on this. There's quite a lot of information you need to find and present, but we have also put together some links where you will be able to find that information. There's not a huge amount of information on the internet, so we've picked out the stuff that's useful, basically to save you time trawling through Wikipedia pages that don't really give you the answers you're looking for. So take a look at the next slide with some information on it. Pause this video on that slide and use it to help you fill in all that information on page 25, not page 11. Right, for the last of those 6 boxes then, you might struggle to find a little bit of information about it because Western Woods is really small, it's not particularly well studied, people haven't really put together a lot of websites or anything about it. But what I have managed to find is, although Western Woods hasn't undergone much management over the last few years, they've kind of left it very much natural as much as possible. There has been some events that have affected the woods and also some things that people have done to try and make it the best possible habitat. So the last event of any note really that happened to Western Woods was way before you were born, and in fact before even I was born. There was a large storm in 1990, so yeah, 30 years ago, and this was the last time that Western Woods had really been impacted by any events. So during this storm, a lot of their trees, their biggest, oldest trees, were destroyed by the heavy winds and by other effects of the storm as well. And this unfortunately destroys a lot of habitat for things like nesting birds and for burrowing animals who had their burrows beneath the trees, etc. It wasn't a human event because the storm wasn't caused by people, obviously, but the way that people managed the woods afterwards there was a lot of debate about whether they should replant the trees, but it was actually decided that the best thing to do would be to leave the trees as they were, so all kind of fallen over, broken, snapped, gnarly, because it was decided that actually all of this dead matter would be really good habitat for a whole range of other animals like insects, burrowing animals, because when this matter kind of breaks down and decays, it doesn't just decay immediately, it doesn't just kind of die and turn into mush. It takes a really long time to slowly and gradually decompose. Remember, when we have trees and plants and animals decomposing, it returns lots and lots of lovely nutrients into the nutrient cycle, and that's fantastic for the ecosystem in the future. So they decided not to do anything about it, not to replace the trees, but to let nature take its course effectively. The other management that they have done in Western Woods is they have decided that any of the open areas, like you can see in this picture here, they have very much tried to control the growth of grass. You might think keeping it natural, keeping the grass nice and long would be a really good idea, but actually in a woodland ecosystem like Western Woods, if they let that grass grow forever and did nothing to it, what would happen is all those grassy areas would become covered in bushes and hedges like you can see in that picture, and eventually trees. It's lovely to have lots of trees, but that open grassland actually provides the perfect habitat for a lot of really interesting and quite rare plants, things like certain types of orchids and oxeye daisies, which don't grow in many places in the UK anymore. And these plants are really important because they attract a lot of insects, especially bees, and bees, as you hopefully know by now, are really, really important to the UK, and we're losing a lot of bees because we are cutting down and getting rid of their habitats and their wildflowers. So we need to encourage bees because they pollinate our food, our plants that make our food basically. So the more things we can do to attract bees, the better. And so all of the open areas in Western Woods have been mowed, basically big tractors or big sit-on lawnmowers, that they would mow the grass, keep it nice and short so that these plants, these rarer plants, could still grow rather than it just turning into all bushes and hedges and eventually trees. They took that a step further by then deciding that actually they weren't going to increase carbon emissions and bring big heavy petrol mowers and have an impact on the rest of the area, but actually they were going to do it in the most natural way possible, which was by grazing cows in the area. So if you've walked through there at certain times of the year, you might find that actually there are quite large herds of cows in certain areas. They are there because they are keeping the grass nice and short to allow all of these rarer plants and insect-loving plants to grow. So that is the main management that's happened in Western Woods. It's not a very exciting place, but it's really typical of a UK woodland ecosystem. And it's a really nice example of something that you can see pretty much right on your doorstep. So if you haven't been to visit there and you are local, please do go take a little wander around there. There's lots of nice information signs as well that you could get even more information, and just go and have an explore, get some time out in the great outdoors. One last thing I'd like you to do, and that is just to bring together all of this information, summarise that information from page 25, which you should also added information from that last slide to. I want you to take all that information, again page 25, not page 11. I'd like to summarise it all into 5 bullet points on a post-it note or a small piece of paper. And then I would like you to summarise those 5 bullet points down to 5 words. So what are the 5 most important words to do with this named example of a UK ecosystem and changes to a UK ecosystem? Keep that summary ready for the start of our next lesson together. Keep your notes all nice and tidy because that's going to make life so much easier when we go back to school. And I will see you next lesson.